All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. So, for anyone who is new, this is part of my good night reading series. So, I did this a few months ago and I had to stop because, well, I had a job where I was really using my voice a lot and it kind of ended up cracking and not getting super great. So, if you want to see and listen to the initial start of Jane Eyre, please feel free to go and look at my other live videos on YouTube. You can find them. You can see all the way from where we are starting at and to where we are right now. So it's definitely a very good novel. I personally really love it. I've never read it before. I've seen a lot of variant films on it, and the book is just really good. I really like it. So I really wanted to get back into finishing this book because the end of the year is coming, and I know a lot of people really enjoyed listening to me read through this, and some people have said that they've fallen asleep to me, which is the whole purpose of this. So yeah, I guess if you don't want any spoilers, please feel free to turn away now because I'm going to basically give a very brief synopsis as to what's happened and where we are in this story. So essentially, this book follows Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre is someone who is considered a ward at first, and her parents have passed away, and she lives with her aunt. And her aunt's not the greatest, and she has some not so great cousins as well. They're pretty mean to her. And she has a moment where her cousin hits her, and she's really upset about it, and she's really loud and angry towards her aunt. And her aunt is like, wow, you're talking back to me, you're awful, and locks her in a room where her uncle supposedly died. And it's not a great experience for her. She's terrified and she ends up hitting her head really hard. So after that whole debacle, her aunt's like, yo, this kid is wild. She's out of control. I can't deal with her. And she decides to send her off to school. So Jane ends up going to school. It's a very religious school, and the teachers are not very nice, but Jane's very bright and she takes to her education really well. She ends up having a friend that, she really gets really close with, but her friend gets very sick and dies. So this was a huge impact towards Jane, and she went through that experience, and it definitely changed her. And so as she gets older, she ends up becoming a teacher at the school herself. And at one point, she decides that, she needs to move on in her life and find a station of her own so she can actually carve out a life. So she ends up doing that, and she finds a position at um, the Fairfax house, which is owned by Mr. Rochester, who becomes kind of like the main man in her life that she's very interested in. And the position that Mr. Rochester has open for is for his ward, who is possibly his daughter, but it's not actually confirmed. And so she gets the position, and she's there and she's teaching this young girl, and she has all these interactions with Mr. Rochester. But here's the thing, their first encounter was something strange and unexpected. So she was walking to, I think it was to deliver mail, and then she was walking home, and there was Mr. Rochester riding his horse, and he almost trampled her. And he thought that she was some kind of fairy that bewitched his horse and bewitched him. And, he falls off of his horse, and, he ends up hurting his ankle, and she helps him back on. And back then, touching was something that wasn't done very often, like hugging or touching someone's hand. So it's very, very electric, this meeting. And so she helps him back on the horse, and she's like, okay, it's great meeting you, sir. Bye. And he's like, well, you better make haste with your letter or whatever you're doing. And she's like, yep. And so she does her thing, and she goes back to the Fairfax house, and everybody is just going crazy. They're all busy. Everybody's doing something. And she's like, we've never been this active in this house. What's going on? And they're like, oh, Mr. Rochester's home. And she's like, Mr. Rochester? Oh. And eventually she meets Mr. Rochester, and she's like, oh my word. Oh, you're the guy who fell off his horse around me. Ooh. So it's definitely an interesting interaction. It's a little heated, but he's very interested in Jane because she speaks her mind in a way that it's different for him because everybody's so, I guess, guarded around him, especially women. He doesn't consider himself attractive or very interesting himself, but he finds Jane riveting. And the two of them, they keep talking, and of course she's still doing the studies for his ward, Adele. And over time they start kind of developing feelings for one another. And then there's this scene that happens where it's late at night and she hears the sound of laughing. And so Jane's like, why is there laughing? And then she gets up and she's walking out into the hallway, and there's smoke. And she's like, why is there smoke? Oh my God. So she runs, and it's Mr. Rochester's room she ends up in. And his canopy bed is on fire. And she's like, wake the hell up. Oh my God. And so he wakes up, they put out the fire, and he's like, Jane, you saved me. You you had nothing to gain from saving me, and yet you did it. And she's like, it's the right thing to do. So he's completely shocked. And he's like, Jane, stay in my room for now, and I'll talk to you later. So he ends up leaving. She's in his bedroom that's partially burnt. And then he comes back and he's like, I've checked everything out. There's no laughing, nothing about. And she's like, wow, this is such a weird occurrence. This is so strange, but okay. So then life goes on. And then there's an instance where they throw a party at the Fairfax house. So it's all these ladies and gentlemen, they come, and it's a grand affair. And Jane feels really out of place because she's a governess. She's not really anybody in society. She's considered the help essentially. But Mr. Rochester doesn't necessarily treat her as the help, and he requests that she's involved in the party, as in she's seen and people see that she's there and that she's part of the Fairfax household. But there's this lady Ingram who does not like Jane at all, and she says some horrible things, that governesses are the worst thing ever, and that they're just vile creatures. And Jane feels so sad about this whole interaction that she just removes herself. And Mr. Rochester is like, Jane, what's going on? I thought we were all having a good time. And she's like, okay. I don't feel the same. And there's this exchange between the two of them where, there's that kind of like, I guess, a yearning or like a hidden kind of like romantic electricity about them. And you can tell that Mr. Rochester is very fond of her. And Jane is also fond of Mr. Rochester as well, because Jane's never really interacted with a man before, in the sense that is, someone she could see as her equal. And so eventually, they kind of break between the two of them. He goes back to his party and she just kind of goes off about her day. And in the middle of the night, there's a huge commotion. And she wakes up and she's like, what's going on? The whole house is awake. And Mr. Rochester, he addresses everybody. They're all in like, their sleeping clothes. And he's like, everybody go back to bed. I'll deal with this. Whatever yelling you hear, don't worry about it. It's just somebody who's had a nightmare. And so he goes to Jane and he's like, Jane, I need your help. And so they go together and they go to, I believe it's his bedroom. And there's a man there who came from Jamaica that's shot, or he's bitten. No, he's bitten. My bad. I remembered incorrectly. So he's like bitten, or he's had like something happen to him. And Jane is like, oh my God, there's blood. This is a lot going on. Keep in mind, back then, blood and gore, that was not the norm. So for them, especially for Jane, it's definitely a sobering sight where, it's surprising that she's keeping her composure. And so they help this guy, and she ends up having to stay with this wounded guy from Jamaica. And Mr. Rochester leaves, then he goes to get a doctor. And the whole time, Jane is sitting there and she's like, what is going on? Mr. Rochester's bed was on fire. This guy gets attacked. There's like these, not so great women at this party. Just the secrets are crazy here. Like, what is going on in this house? And so eventually Mr. Rochester comes back with a doctor. They help this guy, and he gets, basically kicked out of the house. And she's just there. And Mr. Rochester is just like, Jane, you are fantastic. Thank you for, helping this man. You don't know who he is and you don't know what's going on, but in due time you will. And so Jane is just kind of taken back, but she's still falling in love in a sense with Mr. Rochester. And things kind of ensue for a while. And she keeps feeling like, she'll never be anything there. And, at one point she's like, I want to leave you, Mr. Rochester. I'm having feelings for you and things like that. And he's like, well, Jane, believe it or not, I too also have feelings for you. And then he kind of, I guess, in a way proposes, and he says that he wants to be with her the rest of his life and that she's unlike any other woman he's ever met. So they end up having a wedding staged, and Jane's got this gorgeous outfit, and she gets her hair done. It's a wonderful time, but it's strained. Mr. Rochester is angry and he wants to get on with things, and he's upset and frustrated. And Jane is like, well, wait, isn't this supposed to be a good, feeling for us? Shouldn't we be happy about being married together? So what ends up happening is Mr. Rochester, he grabs Jane and he drags her to the church, and they're the before the father, and they're trying to do the vows, and all of a sudden the man who was attacked, that was from Jamaica, he shows up, and he shows up with, I think it's a lawyer, and he says, this marriage can't happen. Jane and Mr. Rochester can't be together because Mr. Rochester is already married to somebody. And it is the most crushing experience that Jane's ever had, because she thought Mr. Rochester was not married. So she didn't even know that that was a thing. So she feels completely crushed, betrayed, all the things, and she's just disgusted. So Mr. Rochester gets really angry, and he drags everybody, and he's like, oh, so you want to see my wife, my real wife? You want to see what I've had to put up with and that I cannot have joy? So he drags everybody up to the top of the Fairfax Manor, and locked away is his actual wife. I think her name is Antoinetta Bertha Mason, and she is a daughter from a rich plantation in Jamaica. And the man who was bitten earlier in the story is actually her brother. So Mr. Rochester's wife, Mrs. Rochester, is a little crazy, and she's been locked away. They don't say exactly what's wrong with her. However, part of me thinks it might be schizophrenia, but it could also be something else in kind of intertwined with it. They don't really go through the motions of exactly what's wrong with her. They say she's just mad. Granted, it probably wouldn't be as bad as if she was actually, here in our times where, there's better health care. But anyway, so Mr. Rochester's there with all these people, and he's like, yeah, this is my wife. She's a monster. She's not even a wife anymore. She's something else. And so she's kind of like violent and crazy, and Jane just ends up leaving because she's like, this is so wrong on so many levels, and she has every right to. So she leaves, and she just like locks herself away in her bedroom, and she's just absolutely crushed and just completely shut down. So she stays in her room for quite a while. She doesn't take water, doesn't eat anything, nothing. And it gets to a point where eventually she's like, I should get up, I should get water, I should do something. So she does, and Mr. Rochester has been outside her door the entire time waiting for her, trying to explain himself and say that Jane is his freedom, that, being with Jane is like, breathing fresh air and, having real love again. And, Jane is just not having any of it. She's like, you're married and you tricked me. You tricked me. And he's like, but Jane, you just don't understand. And she's like, no, Mr. Rochester, you don't understand. And so they kind of go at it for a second, back and forth, where he's like, no, Jane, be with me. We may not be able to be together in husband and wife sense, but we can still be together. And Jane is like, I am not going to be a mistress to anybody. No way in hell. God has told me that is not how I'm supposed to do it. Because there's a lot of religious subtext to this story as well. So for Jane, getting married is a big, big deal. Like, she is locked in for life. So eventually she kind of like goes away from Mr. Rochester and he goes to bed and she's off on her own and she decides, I'm leaving. So she takes what she can and she just basically leaves Fairfax and she catches a carriage and, you know, at one point, she gets dropped off as far as the carriage will take her and she's just kind of roaming the hills of England. She's in the countryside. She doesn't know anybody. She ran out of money and it's just a bad situation and she's going from town to town seeing if she can get food or work, something, anything to begin a new life. And it's just not going well. People just see her as some street urchin, somebody they don't want to deal with. And so at one point, it starts pouring down rain, and she becomes desperate, and she ends up at a house. And this house has a woman there that's like, oh, we don't want to deal with beggars and urchins. We don't want to deal with you. And she's like, please, I need help. And all of a sudden, there's these other women that are in the house that say, what are you doing? And they come and they help Jane. They take her out of the rain. They change her. They get her, into dry clothing, and they let her rest. So it turns out that it's a group of sisters that are living in this house. They're not nuns or anything, but they're siblings. And they're like, Jane, we've always wanted another sister, so it's two girls. And of course, it's their, what do you call it? Their maid. The maid is the one who didn't want to bring Jane in. The maid was like, absolutely no way. And the sisters are like, no, we're bringing Jane in. We're going to help and be good Christian people. And so then their brother shows up, and it turns out that their brother is a preacher. And the brother is very taken by Jane, and he's like, Jane is smart, she's educated, and, I think Jane would be great for our schoolhouse, to teach the schoolgirls of the countryside, get them educated, as well as maybe some of the school boys too. And so Jane's like, hey, I'm all for it. I would love to, be the school mistress and take care of these children. That's definitely a calling for me, given my upbringing, and obviously being a governess back at Fairfax. So Jane is basically given a place to stay, and she becomes the school mistress. But here's the thing. She doesn't essentially go by her actual name of Jane Eyre. She goes by a different name, and it's kind of odd for her, but she knows she wants to hide her identity. She doesn't want Mr. Rochester to find her because she knows what he's going to try to do. He's going to try to beg and plead for her to go back with him and be a mistress to him. So this entire time, she's just been teaching children and kind of being the school mistress for this little town and kind of doing that. Meanwhile, the preacher, he ends up kind of finding out that Jane has something hidden about her. And he starts investigating and thinking, hey, something's going on here with Jane. And I don't trust who she says she is. Even though she's a good person and she's doing right by us, something's just off. So he ends up kind of doing some digging and kind of figuring out. And that's kind of where we are right now. So it's Christmas time. Jane's excited. She's going to spend Christmas with these two, siblings, these sisters, and the preacher brother, and she's very excited. So it's definitely a Christmas time feel. And Jane is like, I couldn't have asked for any better family than now. Jane's never had a family before. So it's a wonderful experience. So that's kind of where we are in the story of Jane Eyre. And if you want, you can always go back to my previous live videos on YouTube and you can watch from the beginning and listen. And yeah, so my goal is tonight to get through all of what I have left of Jane Eyre to read. And yeah, hopefully the story ends on a high note and we can all have the good feelies. And yeah, so we'll get started. Chapter 34. It was near Christmas by the time all was settled. The season of the general holiday approached, and I now closed Morton School, taking care that parting should not be barren on my side. Good fortune opens the hand as well as the heart wonderfully, and to give somewhat when we have largely received is but to afford a vent to the unusual ebullition of the sensations. I had long felt with pleasure that many of my rustic scholars liked me, and when we parted, that consciousness was confirmed. They were manifested their affection plainly and strongly. Deep was my gratification to find that I had really a place in their unsophisticated hearts. I promised them that never a week should pass in future that I did not visit them and give them an hour's teaching in their school. Mr. Rivers came up as, having seen that classes were now numbering 60 girls, filed out before me and locked the door. I stood with the key in my hand, exchanging a few words of special farewell with some half-dozen of my best scholars, as decent, respectable, modest, and well-informed young women as could be found in any of the ranks of the British peasantry. And that is saying a great deal. For, after all, the British peasantry are the best taught, best mannered, and most self-respecting of any in Europe. Since those days I have seen, well, paysannes and bourgemen, and in the best of them seemed to me ignorant, coarse, and besotted, compared with my Morton girls. "Do you consider that you have gotten your reward for a season of exertion?" asked Mr. Rivers, when they were gone. "Does not the consciousness of having done some real good in your day and generation give pleasure?" Doubtless.
"And you have only toiled a few months. Would not a life devoted to the task of regenerating your race be well spent?"
"Yes," I said, "but I could not go on forever so. I want to enjoy my own faculties as well as to cultivate those of other people. I must enjoy them now. Don't recall either my mind or body to the school. I am out of it and disposed for a full holiday."
He looked grave. "What now? What sudden eagerness is this you evince? What are you going to do?"
"To be active as I can, and first I must beg you to tell Hannah at liberty and get somebody else to wait on you."
"Do you want her?"
"Yes, go with me to Moor House. Diana and Mary will be at home in a week, and
I understand, and I thought you were for flying off on some excursion. It is better so. Hannah shall go with you."
"Tell her to be ready by tomorrow, then, and here is the schoolroom key.